My ex-girlfriend is sleeping in my bed every night, but we're definitely broken up. Those two sentences have been the operating reality of my apartment for 6 weeks, and I have not fully reckoned with what the reality means, because reckoning with it would require me to name what we are doing, and naming it would require both of us to decide what to do next, and neither of us has been ready to decide. The breakup happened on a Tuesday. It was real with real reasons that I am not going to fully detail, because the reasons belong to both of us and are not the point. The point is that we broke up, and Sloane did not leave. She stayed that night because it was late, and because the breakup had been exhausting. She slept on the couch. The next night, she slept on the couch because she had not yet found somewhere to go. The third night, she slept in the bed. I want to be clear about the mechanics. We did not have sex. We have not had sex since the breakup. We slept on our respective sides the way we had slept for 3 years. Me on the left and her on the right, with a significant amount of negotiated space between us. We did not touch. We did not cuddle. We slept. Like people who had been sleeping in the same bed for 3 years and had forgotten how to do it any other way. The arrangement continued. Through the second week when she found somewhere to go, her sister Dior's place. Through the third week when she officially had a different address, but came back around 10 every evening and left around 7 every morning. Through the fourth and fifth and sixth week, she would come in. We would make dinner separately and eat together. We would talk about our days in the specific casual way of roommates. She would go to bed. I would go to bed later. I would sleep next to her. She would leave before I woke up. We did this for 6 weeks. What finally made me say something was the toothbrush. She had taken her toothbrush when she moved to Dior's. She had been brushing her teeth at her sister's before coming over. Last Tuesday night I came home and there was a new toothbrush in the cup in my bathroom next to mine. Not her old toothbrush, a new one. She had bought a new toothbrush specifically for my apartment so she would not have to brush at her sister's first. I stood in the bathroom and looked at the toothbrush for approximately 2 minutes. Then I went to the living room where she was on the couch and I said, "We need to talk about the toothbrush." She said, "What?" I said, "There is a toothbrush in the bathroom." She said, "Yes." I said, "You bought a new toothbrush." She said, "Yes." I said, "For my apartment." She said, "Yes." I said, "We broke up 6 weeks ago." She said, "Yes." I said, "You are sleeping here every night." She said, "Yes." I said, "You bought a toothbrush." She said, "Yes." I said, "I think we need to talk about what we are doing." She said, "I have been waiting for you to say something." I said, "I have been waiting for you to say something." She said, "We have been waiting for each other." I said, "For 6 weeks." She said, "That is extremely us." We sat on the couch. She said she did not know what we were doing. I said, "Neither did I." She said she thought we broke up for real reasons. I agreed. She said she also did not want to stop sleeping here. I said I also did not want her to stop. She said, "So what is this?" I said, "I think this is a third thing." She said, "What third thing?" I said, "I think we have been sharing a bed for 3 years and we broke up, and the breakup addressed the relationship part but did not address the bed part, and the bed part apparently has its own requirements." She said, "That is not a thing." I said, "I know it is not a thing, but it is what we are doing." She said, "The toothbrush committed me to something." I said, "To what?" She said, "To this being a thing." We decided on 2 weeks, a phase with an end date. She said a phase felt safer because it ends and we would not have to explain to anyone what we were doing. I said the phase ending would mean one of us leaving, which was the thing we had been avoiding for 6 weeks. She said yes. She said, "What happens after 2 weeks?" She said, "I take my toothbrush." I said, "And then?" She said, "And then we find out what this was." The 2 weeks started. Day 4. She is next to me as I write this. She is asleep. I am writing this on my phone in the dark. I do not know what the 2 weeks are going to produce. I think the toothbrush unlocks something. I think sometimes the things we hinge our lives on are the things we do not expect. Day 5. I woke up and Sloane was gone, same as always. But there was a note on the counter, written on the back of a receipt in handwriting I had not seen in a while because nobody writes things down anymore. It said, "Dinner tonight? Actual dinner, not parallel dinner." In 6 weeks, we had never planned something together. We had only coincided. The note was on purpose. We cooked together for the first time since the breakup. One meal. She was cutting vegetables and I was at the stove, and the kitchen felt like it belonged to 2 people choosing to be in it at the same time. She did not look up from the cutting board when she said, "I told Dior about the 2 weeks." I said, "What did she say?" She said, "We are idiots." She said, "I am using you as a security blanket." I said, "Are you?" She put the knife down. She said, "I don't know. Are you using me as one?" I said, "I don't know either." Day 6. I called my best friend Stanislav on my lunch break. I sat in my car and told him everything. The breakup, the bed, the 6 weeks, the toothbrush, the 2 weeks, all of it. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Do you love her?" I said, "That is not the question." He said, "That is the only question." I did not answer. The line was quiet. He said, "Your silence is an answer." I said, "My silence is me not wanting to say it because saying it makes the 2 weeks mean something different." He said, "The 2 weeks already mean something different. You are just the last person to know." Day 7. Halfway through the first week, I came home and Sloane was not there. 10 came, 11 came. She texted, "At Dior's, might stay here tonight." I got in bed. The right side was empty. Just sheets and her pillow and nothing else. I cannot explain how loud an empty side of a bed can be. I have not slept alone in this bed in 6 weeks. Before that, 3 years. I typed, "The bed is weird without you." I stared at it. I deleted it. I typed, "Okay, good night." I lay in the dark for 2 hours. I tried putting a pillow where she usually is, which is a thing I will never admit to anyone. Nothing worked. The bed was wrong. Too big, too flat, too quiet. At 1 in the morning, the front door opened. Her keys, her shoes coming off. She got in bed on the right side. Neither of us said anything. After a minute, she said, "I could not sleep there either." Something in my chest cracked open, and I was not ready to look at what was inside it. Day 8. Things felt different. Before day 7, we had moved through the apartment like ghosts who shared a space. Now she looked at me when I was making coffee and I felt it. Now I noticed when she laughed at something on her phone and I wanted to ask what was funny. For 6 weeks, I had not wanted anything from her except her presence. Now I wanted more. And the more was scary because more is what relationships are, and we were not in a relationship. We were in a 2-week phase with a toothbrush. Day 9. Someone knocked on the front door. Dior. She looked at me the way someone looks when they have been thinking about what they are going to say for a long time. We sat at the kitchen table. I could hear Sloane in the shower down the hall. Dior said, "I am going to be honest with you because nobody in this situation is being honest." She said, "You are not doing my sister a favor by letting her sleep here. You are doing yourself a favor." I said, "I know." She looked surprised I did not argue. She said, then why are you doing it? I said, because she keeps coming back. She said, she keeps coming back because you never close the door. I said, I do not want to close the door. She said, that is the problem. You do not want to close it and you do not want to open it all the way. You want it exactly where it is, cracked, and my sister is living in the crack. I did not have an answer. She was completely right. Dior said, the 2 weeks are not going to fix anything if neither of you says what you actually want. Sloane came out of the bathroom in a towel. She saw Dior at the table and stopped. She said, what are you doing here? Dior said, saying what you will not say. Sloane said, you do not get to decide what he needs to hear. Dior looked at both of us. She looked at the space between us, which was the kitchen and the table and the whole apartment and everything we had built out of avoidance. She said, you two are so careful with each other that you are going to careful yourselves into nothing. She left. The apartment was quiet the way apartments are quiet after someone has said the truest thing anyone has said in weeks. Sloane sat on the couch. She said, she is not wrong. I sat next to her. I said, the door part. I have been keeping the door cracked. She said, so have I. I said, what do we do about the door? She said, we have 6 days left. I said, that does not feel like enough. I said, it felt like too much 4 days ago. She almost smiled, the corner of her mouth moving and then stopping like she caught it. Then she said, I got a job offer. The words in my throat dissolved. She said, it is in another city. The room changed. The couch was the same couch and the walls were the same walls. But the room was different because everything I was about to feel got swallowed by something cold and factual. I said, when? She said, they called yesterday. I said, is that why you stayed at Dior's? She said, yes. I said, when do they need an answer? She said, by the end of the 2 weeks. The same 2 weeks. The deadline that was already a deadline now had a second deadline on top of it. The 2 weeks had been a container. Now they were a countdown to something with a city attached to it. Something that might not include my apartment or my bed or the toothbrush in the cup. Days 10 and 11. The job offer sat in the apartment like a third person. It was in the kitchen when we made coffee. It was on the couch. It was in the bed between us where the negotiated space used to just be space and was now space with a question inside it. The 2 weeks had changed. They were not about the bed anymore. They were about whether she stays or goes. Before the job offer, the worst case was she takes the toothbrush and goes back to Dior's and I sleep alone and the bed is wrong for a while and then eventually it is not wrong anymore. That was survivable. Now the worst case was she leaves. Not leaves the apartment. Leaves. Goes somewhere I cannot drive to on a Tuesday night. Day 12. Sloane came home after 10. She had been at Dior's. She had that look. Half tired, half resolved. Like someone had been pulling things out of her she did not want to give up. She said, Dior thinks I should take the job. I said, what do you think? She said, I think I need to know what I am staying for before I can decide whether to go. I gripped the counter hard enough that my knuckles went white. I was glad I was facing the cabinets. I said, you have been sleeping in my bed for 6 weeks. You came back at 1 in the morning because you could not sleep without me. You bought a toothbrush. And you are asking me if there is a reason. She said, those are habits. I said, those are not habits. She said, then what are they? I said, I do not know yet. That is what the 2 weeks are for. She said, we have 3 days left and I have a phone call to make. I said, I am not ready. She said, the phone call does not care if we are ready. Day 13. Sloane was not there when I came home. Her toothbrush was still in the cup. Her pillow still smelled like her shampoo. I sat on the bed. I called Stanislav. I said, I think I am going to lose her because I cannot say the thing. He said, what is the thing? I said, you know what the thing is. He said, I need you to say it. I said, I love her. I love her and the breakup was real and the reasons were real, but I love her and I do not want her to go. The words came out and they were real and they existed outside of my body for the first time and I sat on the bed and I listened to them hang in the room. Stanislav said, then tell her that, not me. I said, what if I tell her and she goes anyway? He said, then at least she goes knowing and at least you do not spend the rest of your life wondering if the reason she left is because she thought there was no reason to stay. Sloane came in around 11. Same sides, same space, but the space felt like a canyon, not the negotiated distance of 3 years. A canyon full of everything we had not said. I said, can we talk tomorrow? Really talk? She said, tomorrow is day 14. I said, I know, day 14, the last day. We were both awake. Neither of us pretended to be asleep. We lay there on our sides with our eyes open and the morning light coming through the curtains. 7 o'clock came and she did not leave. She did not get up and slip out the way she had for 6 weeks. She stayed. I did not get up for coffee. We lay in the bed at 8 in the morning and the 2 weeks were over. I sat up. She sat up. Respective sides. I said, I have been thinking about the door. She waited. She did not push. She sat with her knees pulled up and her hands in her lap. I said, Dior said I kept it cracked. She was right. I kept it cracked because closing it meant losing you and opening it meant risking the same thing that broke us the first time. I thought if I kept it cracked, then neither had to happen. She said, that is not sustainable. I said, I know. She said, I need to tell you something about the job. I was not going to tell you about it. I was going to take it and use it as the reason to leave on day 14. I was going to make the job the thing that ended this, so neither of us had to be the one to end it. I said, that is what you were doing at Dior's. She said, Dior helped me see it. She said I was building an exit so I would not have to walk through the door. I said, do you want the job? She said, I want the job. I also want to be here. I cannot have both. I said, I need to say the thing I have not said. She turned her whole body toward me on the bed. I could feel the weight of every day, every night, every unsaid word pressing against the inside of my chest. I said, I love you, and the breakup was real, and I am not pretending it did not have real reasons, but I love you, and the bed was never about habit. The bed was about the fact that I cannot sleep without you, and I did not want to say that because saying it felt like admitting the breakup was wrong, and the breakup was not wrong. The breakup was right, and I still love you. Both things are true. She was quiet for a long time. Her eyes got wet. She did not wipe them. She said, both things are true for me too. I said, so what do we do? She said, what if I do not take the toothbrush, and I do not take the job, and we open the door all the way, and it breaks us again? I said, then it breaks us again, but at least we are not living in a crack. She almost laughed, the closest thing to a real laugh in weeks. She said, Dior would be furious. I said, Dior said we were being too careful. This is the opposite of careful. She said, this is terrifying. I said, yes. She said, the toothbrush stays. I said, the toothbrush stays. She said, and the job? I said, that is yours. That was always yours. That is not about us. She said, what if I take it? I said, then we figure that out. out, together, not from opposite sides of the bed. She said, I think this is the third thing. I said, what third thing? She said, the one you said 6 weeks ago. The thing that is not getting back together and not moving on. The third thing. I said, I think the third thing is just us deciding to stop being afraid of the door. Sloan called about the job later that day. She asked them for 2 more weeks. They said yes. These 2 weeks are not a countdown. They are a choice. That night we got in bed. Same sides, same space. But she reached across and put her hand in the middle. Not on my side, not pulling me toward her, just in the middle, in the space that had been empty for 6 weeks. I put my hand next to hers, not touching, just close. She said, the toothbrush is still in the cup. I said, I know. She said, good. I slept. For the first time in 6 weeks, I slept without wondering what the morning means. The toothbrush is in the cup. She is on the right side. I am on the left. The door is open.